What the Trump administration is currently doing day by day throughout American cities is so vile and indefensible. Neighbors being chased and wrestled to the ground, folks being asked to show their papers, that Americans en masse are getting fed up. We've got some new data to show you tonight. Take, for example, Los Angeles. This whole week was filled with masked, heavily armed officers of ICE and Border Patrol rolling up on flea markets, Home Depot parking lots, Walmarts, even Dodger Stadium in search of immigrants to arrest. In fact, there has been no unrest in L.A. for over a week, none whatsoever. And yet Trump still has thousands of Marines and National Guard soldiers patrolling the streets. Today, Trump was gloating over an appellate court decision that for now allows him to continue to deploy California's National Guard to L.A. over the repeated objections of Governor Gavin Newsom. Also today, Vice President J.D. Vance traveled to L.A. to take his tour of the city. This is, a week and a half or more after the burning of the Waymos that precipitated the sending in the troops. That's the guy, you'll remember, spread the lie that migrants in Ohio were eating animals off the street last year. And he used his remarks moments ago to spread the lie that California is a leftist rogue state that deserves the police state treatment.
We have a public official in Gavin Newsom and Los Angeles Mayor Karen Bass, who over the past few years have actively encouraged illegal migration into this community. When I saw this city, when I was driving through to come to this FBI building, all I could think about is what a great American city Los Angeles is, and what a great tragedy it is that we have allowed illegal immigration and rioting to destroy, I think, one of the great gems of the American family.
Oh, really? That's what went through your head as you drove in your huge security cordon to go to the FBI building 2 weeks after some people burned a few Waymos? Thanks for that profound take on L.A., Mr. Vice President. By the way, amazing moment. He called the senator from California, Alex Padilla, Jose Padilla, today during that press conference. Also took no questions from local reporters. Mayor Karen Bass is expected to respond to the vice president at a press conference in this hour. We'll tell you what she says when that happens. But here's the thing, to put it simply. What the Trump administration is doing right now, what Stephen Miller and Donald Trump are doing, is gross. And it's also not working. Because what they're attempting is a kind of confidence game to mask the weakness of what they're doing. Because guess what? People hate this. I mean, J.D. Vance, one of the most cravenly cynical figures I've ever seen in American life, loves to spend a lot of time congratulating himself for looking out for the interests of U.S. citizens, while his straw men foes allegedly don't care about Americans. But what have we seen in L.A., really, Mr. Vice President? We've seen video after video of American citizens and their friends and their family and their neighbors, the people that are part of American citizens' lives, being ordered to present their papers and being grabbed and wrestled to the ground and detained, including elected officials. That guy, Alex Padilla, not Jose, Mr. Vice President. And we keep seeing Americans non-violently confronting those masked, armed agents wherever they go. Like employees of a Walmart that was raided in L.A. County on Tuesday. One of them recorded his colleague, again, a U.S. citizen, right? An American, in good standing, Mr. Vance, getting shoved, then swarmed, and then arrested for allegedly punching the masked agents who swarmed him.
He touched me, bro! What is he doing? He's a hard-working bro! What the chill. Hey, we're taking this mother. I'm giving this motherfucker. Yo, chill. I'm not doing. Hey, what the dude? You can't be doing that. This is my civil right. I can record you if I want. Hey, yo, what the look?
Put it in the car. Put it in the car.
Hey, these are illegal citizens, you pieces of you.
Put it in the car. Put it in the car.
Hey, what the is wrong with you guys? Look.
Now, what ICE wants you to believe is that the unarmed man in the blue vest was the aggressor in that video, in that incident, not the dozens of heavily armed men in war camo, okay? Even the Los Angeles Fox affiliate pointed out the Walmart security video showed no punches. And we've seen more scenes like this, scene that nearly replicated in a raid at the Hollywood Home Depot.
Come on, go back to
Get back on the sidewalk!
You guys have no right. Bounty hunters only, not real. You guys have to identify yourself, who you are.
You're coming to us, though. We're over here.
I don't want you there.
You guys you're coming to us. You're coming to us. Yeah, I know, but we're coming
We are
to us.
recording. We're right here. We're recording.
You know what? Americans have a right to do that in this free country. American citizens have a right to do that. They have a right to not be roughed up by masked men holding long guns. You know, even the country's most popular pro-Trump podcaster, Joe Rogan, much has been made about his support for Donald Trump during the campaign, made a pretty important point this week that American voters, the vast majority of them, did not vote for this.
If the Trump administration, if they're running and they said, we're going to go to Home Depot and we're going to arrest all the people at Home Depot, we're going to go to construction sites and we're going to just like tackle people at constructions, I don't think anybody would have signed up for that. They said, we're going to get rid of the criminals and the gang members first, right? And now we're seeing like Home Depots get raided. Like, that's crazy.
It is crazy. I mean, that's what Stephen Miller wants. He wants to construct a police state so as to abduct, incarcerate, and deport 13 million people. And yet, despite all the protests from every part of the political spectrum, Trump's Border Patrol is making propaganda videos of its armed agents locking and loading for warfare in full military fatigues and body armor en masse to raid a suburban flea market and ask patrons where they are from. Again, the administration thinks all this plays to Trump's strengths. I mean, you can see, like, Stephen Miller, like, popping a vein in his head of how much he enjoys this. Yet get this, ready? Trump's polling on immigration, historically one of his strongest issues, genuinely a huge strength during the campaign, there's no question. It's nosediving. Quinnipiac poll earlier this month showed Trump underwater by 11 points on immigration. 54% disapprove. And when you narrow the question down to Trump's deportation policy, the numbers are even worse for him. He is underwater by 16 points. Those polls were taken before Trump moved Marines and National Guard into Los Angeles, but every major poll since then, from NBC News, from Reuters, shows the same trend. Voters are rejecting Trump's police state because it is un-American. And it's not just, localized to Los Angeles. These scenes are playing on local television every night across the country. Here's one in Chicago, where 2 American soldiers, again, American citizens, volunteered to physically protect their mother from ICE.
We hear stories of people showing up for standard case checkups only to find themselves taken into custody by ICE agents. 2 members of the National Guard, seen here, decided to accompany their mother to her Chicago immigration appointment.
We fear that she might get taken into custody. There's been reports of that. They get a text or an appointment. They have to come in, and they end up getting detained.
Putting their own bodies in front of their mom in uniform to prevent her from being snatched by the secret police. Now, that's the same thing, by the way, that New York City Controller Brad Lander was doing for migrants in the city when federal agents roughed him up and cuffed him this week. Similar activities are now being bolstered by the first U.S. bishop appointed by Pope Leo, Michael Pham, who came to this country as a refugee from Vietnam when he was 13, sent a letter to fellow priests in Southern California encouraging them to show up in federal buildings today, World Refugee Day, and support immigrants in their immigration hearings. According to reporters in San Diego, due to Bishop Pham's presence in the courtroom, cases of immigrants today were effectively postponed. Unless you think this same sentiment isn't rampant among normies, consider the fact that one of America's top professional wrestlers, Brody King, showed up to a match in Mexico City Wednesday night wearing a tank top that said "Abolish ICE." I'm going to say this slowly and clearly because it's important, and there's a lot of misdirection on this. Donald Trump and Stephen Miller are on the wrong side of public opinion on this, and they're losing badly in the court of public opinion. Their answer, as always, is to up the ante. More shows of force, more masked agents, more lies. But the more they lean into the cruelty, the less popular it all is.
breaking news on your screen right now. Mahmoud Khalil, who has been held in detention for 104 days, is now leaving the detention center in Jena, Louisiana. This is after a judge ordered his release.
I think it's just remarkable. 104 days he has been there. They have been holding him for, I mean, they made up things to keep him there. There he is. He's in the green, I believe. I think he's with his lawyer. We are unsure who the third person is, but after 104 days, Mahmoud Khalil.
Well, he's a symbol of the oppressive nature of this administration in so many ways, and I think what this should say to a lot of Americans is that the system of justice still holds, and that the courts and the judges, as frustrated as we can be sometimes with them, are still getting it right when it comes to individual liberties, and it's going to be a real test. I mean, this is, this administration is going to find another way to push back and to further upset apple carts in our judiciary as well as in our constitutional system. And so tonight, I think we're all very grateful to see him walk out of there. But there's still more that's going to befall this young man. We know that. The administration is not going to go quietly into that good night just because some judge we talked about in the last half hour. So this is from moments ago, his being released. And so, welcome to a little bit more freedom tonight.
It strikes me, Simone, that the administration tried to make the case of Mahmoud Khalil one of national security. And to think about that in contrast to the story that we came in on about the fact that this is a president who has an incredibly complex decision to make about the U.S.'s involvement in the Middle East. And the fact, I mean, I think of you often as someone who has worked in the White House, who knows how these things are messaged. To take something as delicate as the question of Israel-Iran and in public question the credibility of your own head of intelligence. I mean, what message does that send to our allies? What message does that send to our foes?
I mean, privately, people were saying that Tulsi Gabbard was unqualified for the position in the first place. Publicly, some people said that. Now you have the president
basically
undercutting his own DNI director, but not because I believe he does not think she's qualified to do the job, even though I am someone that knows Tulsi Gabbard and believes she is unqualified for this position, but because he wants information that confirms what it is that he believes to underscore what he wants to do. He has already, according to the Wall Street Journal, this is Mahmoud Khalil speaking right now. Do we have audio?
Over 1,000 people behind me in a place where they shouldn't have been, in that place, in the first place. I hope the next time that I will be in Jena is to actually visit this museum that's a testimony on America's racist policies against immigrants. The hundreds of men who I left behind me shouldn't be there in the first place. The Trump administration are doing their best to dehumanize everyone here. Whether you are a U.S. citizen, an immigrant, or just a person on this land, doesn't mean that you are less of a human. Thank you so much, everyone.
A quick question from The Guardian. So the Trump administration has labelled you a national security threat. They have fought tooth and nail to keep you detained in one of the most renowned and punitive detention centres in the country. Do you have any message for the Trump administration?
Trump and his administration, they chose the wrong person for this. That doesn't mean that there is a right person for this. There is no right person who should be detained for actually protesting a genocide, for protesting their university, Columbia University, that is investing in the genocide of the Palestinian people. So this is my message. I will be able to give more comments at the press conference in New York tomorrow. I really need to catch the flight.
What is the first thing you'll do when you get home tonight?
Just hug my wife and son. That's as simple as that. It's not get back. I did not actually spend time with my son. The only time I spent my son was in a specified 1 hour limit that the government had imposed on us. So that means that now I can actually hug him and Noor, my wife, without looking at the clock. That now it's 59 minutes, and they have to give him back to his mom, and then an ICE officer is coming to escort me out. That what actually means.
What's your message to all other immigrants in this country today?
No one is illegal. No human is illegal. That's the message. The message is justice will prevail, no matter what this administration may try to portraying that immigrants are, whether criminals or any of that, trying to do all of this now. This simply is not true, and just to keep the fight against this administration.
Mahmoud, you spent 3 months inside that detention centre, as you say, with...
Spent 104 days, so more than 3 months.
Reflecting on that time, has it changed you as a person and your politics as well?
Absolutely. I mean, the moment you enter this facility, your rights leave you behind. So once you enter there, you see a different reality, just a different reality about this country that supposedly champions human rights and liberty and justice. But once you cross literally that door, you see the opposite side of what actually happening on this country under just the eyes of everyone. But I will leave it here. Thank you so much, everyone. And again, I will be able to give more comments in New York, but thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thanks, Mahmoud.
Mahmoud Khalil released from detention after 104 days, making this case bigger than himself, alluding to the other people he spent time in detention with, reasserting his political views.
For the purposes of the next couple minutes, let's just say we are a traditional ally of the U.S., a country we've always seen as the single most powerful nation our planet has ever known, which is in the process of making a supremely consequential decision about what it should do or should not do when it comes to Iran. Normally, our American partners might act in conjunction with our allies, people like us, in planning for and acting on a course of action that could upend the world order. But of course, things are very, very different now. So how do we, as an ally of the U.S., go about pursuing our national security interests on this particular matter? Should we maybe, I don't know, call someone in Congress, a bicameral legislative body that has all but ceded its constitutional authority, including its authority to declare war? Or should we maybe, I don't know, call someone in the intelligence community, the same agencies that Trump said a few minutes ago he, quote, disagrees with when it comes to whether or not Iran is close to having a nuclear weapon? Should we reach out to the new director of national intelligence, a woman named Tulsi Gabbard, regardless of whether or not she was a qualified pick, the same person that Trump just said is, quote, wrong on Iran? Likewise, should we reach out to the new defense secretary, a guy named Pete Hegseth, even though the White House has spent this week refuting reports that he and Gabbard have been generally excluded from small group meetings on this topic? Or should we approach Trump directly? It's dicey, but I don't know. He's the guy who unilaterally does things like igniting a trade war that has already upended the world's economy, the man who, in word and deed, has lit a torch to age-old alliances, who just this week said of striking Iran this, quote, I may do it, I may not do it, and, quote, I like to make the final decision 1 second before it is due. No, perhaps best, most accurate way for any ally of the U.S. right now to gauge how and when it will react to the Israel-Iran conflict is simply to watch some of Donald Trump's favorite TV shows. By now, you might have seen the online foreign policy debate raging on this topic between Tucker Carlson and Senator Ted Cruz. We know reporters spotted Steve Bannon, far-right personality and former advisor to Donald Trump at the White House yesterday, a short time before the administration announced a 2-week timeline for making a decision on intervention.
Media Matters puts it like this, quote, "The Fox propaganda engine is driving this chaotic process. Trump reportedly became more interested in U.S. military action because he saw favorable Fox coverage of Israel's initial attacks on Iran, while more recent segments have stressed the importance of U.S. involvement. Fox host Mark Levin and his former colleague Tucker Carlson are waging a scorched earth battle for Trump's ear, with Levin apparently gaining the advantage. Top administration officials with roles in a potential conflict, including Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, are in their positions in the first place because Trump approved of their previous work at the network. Today, with violence still ongoing in the Middle East, Iran's foreign minister met with his European counterparts in Geneva, but refused to meet with American officials. Yet another instance in which U.S. allies increasingly appear to be going it alone without us. It's where we start today with some of our favorite reporters and friends. New York Times diplomatic correspondent Michael Crowley is back, and former State Department spokesman Ned Price is here with us. Michael Crowley, let me ask you just to set the stage with any developments today that I might have missed, or any dynamics that you're also watching and reporting on.
Hi, Nicole, and thanks. You covered it really well. And, the key dynamic here is what is rattling around in the president's head. So, there is diplomatic activity, as you just noted, and the Europeans are doing their best to try to return this to a negotiation and a conversation so that there's some channel, some alternative to the president deciding bomb or don't bomb. Where you have a conversation going with the Iranians again. And by the way, that's one that, in my reporting in the last couple of days, I've talked to a lot of nuclear experts, and I sense a really strong consensus among the people who understand this program best. It's a concern that, military action is not going to completely destroy and end the Iranian program, that you're going to be left with a lot of problems, even if the regime doesn't collapse and you don't get into that whole question of whether Iran turns into the next Libya. You're going to have a lot of questions about where the Iranian program goes from here, and the strong possibility that the Iranians double down and try to do things in secret, try to accelerate their program, and just precipitate another crisis down the line. And so my point is that these experts really are supportive of diplomacy and say that Iran's never going to completely surrender the program. You've got to come up with an agreement. So, in theory, if you believe that premise, this diplomatic activity is helpful and important. But, we just don't know that this is what the president is actually interested in. And everyone is trying to decode these bits and pieces, like who's coming in and out of the, the side entrance of the White House, and what is Steve Bannon saying about this. But honestly, I don't think there's any, grand theory or guiding North Star right now. It's just an entire world on the edge of its seat.
Michael Crowley, what is the 2 weeks? Does anyone have a theory on where that came from, other than it is Donald Trump's favorite interval?
It's his favorite interval. And, I really do think that, look, there could be a lot of different things. It could be a bluff. It could be that he is once again, hoping the Iranians will be caught unawares, as they were apparently last week, whether it was by design, if the president was in on the fact that Israel was attacking, or by chance, if the president was still hoping to delay Israel from attacking. But the Iranians were hearing President Trump talk about another round of negotiations and seemed unprepared for the Israeli strike that took place several days before that meeting was supposed to happen on last Sunday. So maybe this is a bluff. Maybe he was a little bit rattled as he began to hear from allies like Bannon and Carlson, and people were raising all the possible consequences of a strike. But, sometimes the simplest explanation is the one you should rely on. And in this case, I think it's strongly possible that President Trump realizes there's no rush. The Israelis aren't demanding that he do this right away. Fordo's not going anywhere. They're not going to be able to smuggle the nuclear stuff out of it because it's being watched like a hawk. So he's going to take his time, decide at the last minute, maybe see if things develop in a way that makes the decision any easier for him. It could be as simple as that.
Ned, it's so nice to have you on the program. Thank you for being here. I want to show you some of his refrain of 2 weeks, but I just first want your thoughts on this moment we find ourselves in as a country.
Nicole, it's a fraud moment. It's a dangerous moment, but it is one in which I think we should all be hoping that diplomacy wins out. Michael is exactly right. The people he's been speaking to are exactly right. There is one and only one way to permanently and to verifiably ensure that Iran never acquires a nuclear weapon, a goal which we should all share, by the way. We share it with Donald Trump. We share it with our Israeli partners. We share it with countries around the world. And that is through diplomacy. As Michael was alluding to, a military strike might, and I use that term deliberately, might set back Iran's nuclear program. It might set it back by months or longer if it's successful. And of course, that's an if, even though we have all the confidence in the world in the U.S. military. But there's another dynamic at play here, Nicole. If we go after this solely militarily, it provides Iran every incentive in the world to try to reconstitute its program as quickly and as clandestinely as it could possibly do so. And Nicole, it doesn't take Iran the capability to build a full-scale, sophisticated nuclear weapon. If Iran is acting quite literally under the gun and it wants to respond quickly in due time, it can cobble together the enriched uranium that may be left over from the various military strikes. And rather than put together a sophisticated weapon, Iran will have the ability in relatively short order to put together a much cruder nuclear device. So again, there is only one way where we can conclusively deal with this program. It's what we did in 2015 when President Obama and the White House team working on it concluded the JCPOA, the Iran deal. Iran's nuclear program was in a box for those 3 years. I say only 3 years because, of course, it was let out of a box in May of 2018 by President Trump himself, the same president who is now trying to reconstitute something like what we used to have.
I mean, Ned, you're making all of the correct and logical and sane policy arguments based on facts and knowledge and intelligence. But I just want to contrast that with what from the outside looks very different. This is what's happening on Fox News right now. Folks who know Trump is watching, giving him foreign policy, military, and strategic counsel.
We have to do it. And I know President Trump probably watching. It takes a lot of bravery, but as I've been watching your show, you've shown that he's been very consistent about the fact that Iran can never have nuclear weapons. We can't go halfway here.
I mean, what is your sense of what Donald Trump's information and advice diet is right now?
Well, Nicole, I wish it were a complete diet. And I say that in the sense that I wish he were getting the full and considered view of the U.S. government. But of course, he's not. He's not for a couple different reasons. Number one, this administration has really taken a jackhammer to the National Security Council. I spent 3 years on the National Security Council. In my last job at the State Department, I was in every single one of these NSC meetings, including on the issue of Iran. And the point of those meetings is to quite literally get everyone around the table so that the president or the national security advisor or whoever is chairing the meeting can hear the considered judgment of the departments and agencies. You know, Nicole, for people like me, there could be some degree of ambivalence when we hear that someone like Tulsi Gabbard or someone like Pete Hegseth is being excluded from the most sensitive conversations this government is having. And you might be inclined to say, well, that's great. Pete Hegseth is unqualified. Tulsi Gabbard is a little kooky. You know, maybe it's a good thing they aren't there. But Nicole, as you know, the point of the National Security Council and the Situation Room itself is not to gather everyone around the table to profess their own personal views, what they think individually we should do. It is to represent the considered judgment of the department or agency that they lead.
And joining me now is Paula Ramos, MSNBC contributor and author of Defectors, The Rise of the Latino Far Right and What It Means for America. Paula, it is so great to see you. So I know you probably watched the exact same time I was as Vice President J.D. Vance landed in L.A. today, suggesting that troops need to stay there because things could, quote, flare up again. It seems really open-ended. I'm curious what your reaction to his remarks today was.
I mean, it's simple. No, it's the strategy is to simply continue to create the illusion that we are at war with this enemy. No, the idea, I think, is to sustain. And you and I have talked about this. It's to sustain the very same fear, the very same resentment, the very same grievances that got Trump elected in the first place. And so that visit is supposed to symbolically try to distort the reality on the ground. What does that mean? It means trying to paint this idea that protesters are part of the mob, or that Democratic leaders are socialists, or that migrants are invaders and criminals. And so all of those conspiracy theories are now sort of culminating in that show of force that then, as you said, Antonia, are supposed to paint Trump and J.D. Vance as sort of the saviors, these patriotic saviors of the country that are liberating us. And so it's just theatrics, it's politics. Now, the danger to me, though, is that beyond a show of force, we have to remember that for them, this is an ideological battle. No, they have people like Stephen Miller that believe that they truly need to fight for civilization, that they have to fight to really protect our Western values. And so once you mix the physical show of force with this escalating narrative, with that escalating language, that in and of itself, at least to me, it worries me, because it seems like they're creating the perfect storm for even more violence.
There was this one moment that really stood out to me in the presser where we heard the vice president, he was trying to reference Senator Alex Padilla and called him Jose. Take a listen.
Well, I was hoping Jose Padilla would be here to ask a question, but unfortunately, I guess he decided not to show up because there wasn't the theater. And that's all it is. I think everybody realizes that's what this is. It's pure political theater. These guys show up, they want to be captured on camera doing something.
Pure political theater. And Jose, so, Paula, do you think that was a mistake?
I don't know, but I think that's the point. I think the point, first of all, the vice president of the United States of America should know who Alex Padilla is. Now, Alex Padilla is the first Latino senator of California. He's an MIT grad. He's the son of Mexican immigrants. J.D. Vance should know who he is, and that in and of itself, we have to say it, that is a racist comment. Now, are we surprised? I'm not. I'm not surprised because J.D. Vance is also the same person that was pushing conspiracy theories about Haitian migrants, right? He is one of the people that really spread this idea that Haitian migrants were eating pets. He's also the same person that said that Haitian migrants that have TPS are illegal aliens. And so I'm not surprised. Now, the problem is that that type of language, that type of racist language that manifests on the ground. And that is precisely why then you have ICE agents that are roaming around our streets and that are literally harassing people, detaining people, stopping people because they look Hispanic, because they think that everyone is Jose. And so that's the danger when those words manifest in violence on the ground.
Paula, in all your years covering immigration, have you ever seen ICE and sort of the broader federal apparatus operate in this way, where we're seeing people completely masked up, sunglasses, hats on, unwilling to identify or explain themselves, even to elected officials, as we just saw here with Brad Lander here in New York City a few days ago? How abnormal is all of this? To what extent have we crossed a red line, you think?
Look, I think mass deportations are not new. Our broken immigration system is not new. Deporting people is not new. It is part of the dark history of this country. It's not new. Now, what is new is that it seems to be that the cruelty is explicit, and that is manifesting in ways that finally are making people notice. I think of some of the conversations that I've had with some Latino voters, including some Latino Trump supporters, who are looking at these images and are looking at the Marines and are looking at National Guard and they're looking at ICE agents, and it reminds them of Venezuela and it reminds them of Cuba and of Nicaragua. And I think that is kind of this breaking point, that through these ICE raids and through immigrants, people are seeing a larger picture that is making them feel very uncomfortable, taking them back to the authoritarian regimes that many immigrants flee from. And I think that's what's starting to at least feel different to me.
Polling on this issue can be really complicated because on the one hand, there's still a lot of support, and also in Latino communities, for serious border enforcement, border security. But then when you start to ask people follow-up questions about how immigration enforcement has been expanded, activities in the interior of the country, that's where you start to see separation from Trump. I'm curious, To what extent do you think there really is this moment of moral clarity in communities from Los Angeles down to Miami-Dade County? Do you think people are really starting to see this differently than they did just a few months ago during the election?
I think when it comes to some Latinos, you mentioned Miami-Dade County, right? I think one of the differences is that when some Latino voters that supported Donald Trump before the election, when you ask them, do you think that Donald Trump is talking about you? No, when he talks in such negative ways about immigrants, the answer was no. No, most people did not believe that Donald Trump was talking about them when he was referring to Latinos and to immigrants. So I think now it's sinking in, this idea that even U.S. citizens, even Latinos that are U.S. citizens are too being racially profiled. And I think that's sinking in. Now, I think the problem is that that moral outrage has to outweigh the anti-immigrant sentiment. And I think in these moments, we tend to think, and look, and this is where I'm perhaps a little bit more skeptical, but I think in these moments we tend to think that remorse will sort of prevail and that people will have second thoughts. And I still want to believe that. But we always still have to come to the reality that one of the things that we learned in this election is how deep and how toxic and how dangerous that anti-immigrant sentiment is. So the question is, for some of those sort of Latino Trump supporters, when they see those images, do they feel resentful towards the Trump administration, or do they feel resentful towards immigrants? And that's where Trumpism comes into play, that it pushes some Latinos to really, really feel resentful by the fact that they are being lumped into this group with other immigrants. And that, I think, is where we have to really understand the nuance and listen.
It's going to be fascinating to see how attitudes shift in the coming months. You and I both covered the family separation crisis, and we remember the moral outrage, the absolute outrage that was shared by so many. And it feels like we should be back in one of those moments, but we are not quite yet. Paula, thank you so much for joining me tonight. Your insight is always incredible.
Thank you, Antonia.
Reagan-appointed senior judge William Young has a 40-year career presiding over some of the country's highest-profile cases. New reporting from the New York Times takes a look at how the 84-year-old is fast-tracking all the cases against Trump's executive orders that he can, but in a way that, quote, recalls a time when mutual respect and deference to the law were more standard in relations between the executive and judicial branches. Let's bring in former state attorney for Palm Beach County, Florida, Dave Ehrenberg. Dave, thanks for joining us. Talk a little bit about this judge and the tact he's taken to these cases and why it stands out and deserves a New York Times write-up.
Sam, Judge Young is no left-wing Antifa judge. He's a Reagan appointee. He was an Army veteran. He's someone who's well-respected, and he's just upset about what's going on, clearly through his words. He is taking on the Trump administration and is putting his foot on the pedal, unlike other judges like Judge Aileen Cannon, who seem to delay, paralysis by analysis. This judge wants to go and put things on the trial docket. And he's not afraid to speak his mind. And it really upsets the Trump administration. They're like really furious at the fact that he has made these statements. It sounds like Joseph Welch, the Boston lawyer who took on Joseph McCarthy. Have you no decency? This judge says, have we no shame? And so this is why the Trump administration is so upset. They don't like activist judges. Of course, these days, an activist judge is just a judge who disagrees with you. The right wing loves activist judges when they rule their way.
I think there's some virtue that you get when you're 84 years old. You don't really care as much as if you were a younger judge. I want to turn to two cases that we got yesterday, decisions, I should say. One from the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. It basically said that Trump did have the authority to deputize the National Guard, despite what Gavin Newsom said. A real victory for Trump. Another case from a federal judge said that Trump and the Department of Transportation did not have the authority to condition transportation funds on immigration actions. Talk a bit about both cases and what they say for Trump's immigration powers going forward.
Well, the first one came from the formerly liberal Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals out in California. When the first term ended, President Trump appointed 10 out of the 29 judges there. So it became more of a centrist court, and they gave a lot of deference to President Trump in federalizing the National Guard. They say we're going to defer to the president, at least for now, until we get all the facts. And then this is headed to the U.S. Supreme Court. But it was definitely a win for the Trump administration. In that 3-judge panel, 2 of the judges were appointed by President Trump. But interestingly, the 3rd judge who agreed with those 2 judges was appointed by President Biden. So they gave a lot of deference to the president to come in and say, if we think there's a federal policy at stake here, even under that statute they're invoking, we're going to allow the federal government to federalize the National Guard. The other case you mentioned, Sam, which was that case again?
It was a federal case where the judge said that the Department of Transportation cannot condition transportation fundings to states, in this case California, I believe, if they disagree, for instance, with their immigration policies.
Right. That's called the Duffy Directive. So the Secretary of Transportation said that we're going to take away the federal transportation dollars from states that don't enforce our immigration orders. Well, that's a little vague, isn't it? And that's why these 20 states, all Democratic states, went to the courts and said, Your Honor, this isn't right. This is coercive. And the judge, who was appointed by President Obama, agreed and said, no, it's too coercive. Also, what does federal transportation dollars have to do with immigration policy? I understand that if you want to coerce states to raise the drinking age from 18 to 21, remember when the federal government did that, you can then tie it to federal transportation dollars. But there's really not much of a connection here. Plus, the order is too vague, and thus we're not going to allow it to go into effect. But this is yet another case that's headed up to the U.S. Supreme Court.
Well, and Gene, that's what's going to be so fascinating, because you have very conservative justices in John Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett and Brett Kavanaugh, who will predictably take stances that they've held throughout their entire judicial careers, and probably also did going all the way back to law school. But at the same time, on these questions of dramatic, some would say radical expansion of Article II powers by the Trump administration, or their efforts to do that, that's where things get really interesting, and you never know where John Roberts, Amy Coney Barrett, to a lesser degree, Brett Kavanaugh, are going to go in their rulings.
Yeah, on the National Guard, I actually, maybe I'm not a lawyer. I don't think that's that radical, because I remember a couple of instances where Presidents Kennedy and Johnson, during the Civil Rights Movement, federalized the National Guard of Alabama in order to enforce civil rights laws. So,
and by the way, those governors did not want that to happen either.
Exactly.
People are saying, "Oh my God, a president can't do this." When a governor, doesn't want them to come in. They never heard the tape recordings between the Kennedy administration and the Southern governors.
Exactly. They made George Wallace step aside from the schoolhouse door so the University of Alabama could be could be integrated. So that I understand. Right. Can you withhold already appropriated transportation funds because a state isn't doing what you want on the cooperating with ICE? I don't think you can do that. I'm not sure that even this Supreme Court is going to agree that a president can do that. That's a bridge too far.
And Joe, if I could...
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Just if the power of the purse goes to Congress, and even though Congress has emasculated itself, it's still Congress that has to make this decision, not the executive branch.